All right, well, thank you for inviting me. It's good to see a couple familiar names and catch up with a couple old friends, and look forward to meeting you all in person when this world kind of gets back to a little more normal. I am going to be in presentation mode, so I will not see the chat. So I think Kirsten or Travis will monitor the chat and let me know if there's any questions. Feel free to fire the questions during the presentation. I'll try and answer them. The only disclosure I have is that I'm actually the administrator on call for our whole health system right now. So if my pager goes off, I'll be slightly distracted, but I have a 15-minute presentation and a 15-minute timeline to respond to the pager. So I think it should all work out fine. So let me just get my slides sharing here. All right. Presentation mode, yes, there we go. So this is our institutional org chart at a very high level. So when you see up in the upper quadrant, upper line here, we actually have one executive officer that reports to the president of the university. So this is slightly different in that he's the dean and over the clinical operations of the hospital. So controls all three-legged, academic and clinical missions. And then kind of reporting to him in this middle section is our clinical operations. So under here we have our university hospital with cardiovascular center, which is basically our adult mission, and our children's and women's hospital. And then also the UMMG, which is our group practice, which includes ambulatory care. And then within the two academic missions, we basically have the education and the research mission. So that's kind of like on the right-hand side is our school, in the middle is our clinical operations, and then up in the upper left-hand corner here, these are the chairs of the clinical departments. So they report directly to the dean, and then basic science, and then we have some centers that report up through the clinical area as well. So there's great alignment vertically in that you can have very clear lines of authority. So my reporting relationship to the chair's reporting relationship to the dean. So that part makes it work really well. And so within our emergency medicine team, we have the adult ED, the children's ED, survival flight, as well as our academic missions. So like my team is about 900 people and about $120 million of annual spend is what our annual budgets add up to across the various segments. The thing that's interesting about it, though, is each of the segments have different people that are responsible for them. So when the chair and I are working on our adult emergency medicine budget, that goes through the university hospital authority structure. When we're working on the children's emergency room budget, it goes through the children's structure. And when it's the med school budget, it goes through the third structure. So that's kind of how we fit into the overall operating room. The tension that typically exists is the pressures within the segments. So it's up to us to basically balance those tensions out. And then in this slide, this is really how we've organized our org chart to basically align with that structure. So you can see our clinical operations over on the left-hand side, our education mission in the middle, our research mission on the side, and then our divisions. So, we have a community hospital that we staff the ED, that's Hurley. And then we have the children's hospital, which is in the middle, and then our adult hospital with our critical care center on the bottom. So that basically aligns our different divisions within the department across the missions. And then vertically, what we have is like our med students and our residents and things like that. And then we've loosely aligned our research enterprise to kind of show how they fit into the divisions. So what I've tried to do is basically have each of the managers and the teams that report to me be aligned with a faculty member that fits within the mission that they are aligned with. So I can go for me, which I'm down on the bottom here, I can work with my director of operations over any of the clinical things. I can work with my education person over any of the education things. And then she has people to manage the fellowships or the residencies. So we have 16 residents per year for a 4-year residency, so 64 residents here. And then about 10 fellows across the various fellowships. The other nuance also for us from an education perspective is the residents actually rotate through 3 sites. So they participate here from an academic medical center. They go up to Hurley, which again is our community site. That's an urban center which has penetrating trauma, which we really never see in Ann Arbor. And then we have a St. Joe's, which is part of the Trinity National System, which is more of like a community hospital. And what we try and target is to have our residents, about half of them go into academic careers and the other half go into community settings, because part of our mission is to create the physician pipeline for the state of Michigan. So as we think about our emergency room operations, I showed you Jennifer as our director of operations. That reports to me. And then reporting to her, we have each of these different divisions within that. So the adult and children's operations has an associate chair for operations, Jennifer as the director, and then like a facility manager, a lead PA, and then the manager of the clerical group. And then within our children's division, there's a division chief and then a service chief, which does the outward facing and liaisoning to other academic departments within the school, and the M-Plan director, which really handles the hospital operations side of the ED, the nurse manager and the nurse supervisors, which then supervise all the nurses and the techs, and then the adult emergency room, which has the same basic structure. And then we also have our critical care center. So that's kind of how we're organized on the adult and pediatric side for delivering clinical care. Let's see here. And so I thought about, the 3 different models that we're talking about. You're each going to have nuances associated with the model. There's pros and cons with each of them. For my model, one of the pros is that we're matrixed, so we're all on the same team. And one of the cons is that we're matrixed, so there's about 100 points of veto for every decision that you make, which can cause you to go slow from a decision-making authority perspective. I also think that one of the really important things to think about is how do you build your team and how do you create a culture? And there's only so much time in the day that you have. So you need to create a team to accomplish those things. Like, you know, the Department of Emergency Medicine at Michigan will never be successful because of what Steve does. It will be successful because of the 900 people, of which I'm one of those 900 people. And so I think this is kind of, how do we build a culture and how do we create that? And I think organizationally, we've created, you know, a team culture to enable us to advance within our matrixed authority as we have. So are you spending your time on the right things, as Randy said in his last lecture? I did want to take this opportunity, since you're young and emerging leaders, to give you a couple like points of advice. And one of them, just because I was the administrator on call, you know, my wife said there's 26,000, you know, employees at the University of Michigan. Are you really the best person that we could get for this job? And I was like, yeah, I was as surprised as anybody else. And so I think take those opportunities when they're presented to you and go and see different parts of the organization and see how it works. You know, with a team of 900 people, one of the things that I've learned is people come into my office and, you know, sometimes they start to cry. And so I need to have a box of tissues, but you don't want the box of tissues in view, because then if you look at the box of tissues, people start crying sooner. And keep lots of clocks around so you stay on time. Like, I know I have 3 minutes left in this lecture. I view problems as monkeys that are sitting on people's shoulders. And when they come into your office, they have this monkey on their shoulder. And you want to teach your staff to learn to talk about the monkey, address the monkey, figure out what to do with the monkey. But when the person walks out of the office, wave goodbye to the monkey, because you have your problems to solve. You can't solve everybody else's problems. And do things that make you happy. And so this job makes me really happy. So I put a few things on here, you know, that I think are pretty phenomenal. I actually got to buy a Lear jet, and that's a picture that I took out of the window of my our Learjet. So kind of fun to have a you know, a toy to go around the world and pick up organs and bring people back to our institution. We've created a few companies with some IP as part of our research endeavors. We are in the process of creating a research network that's doing some global research, you know, for EDs. We actually did a COVID survey on how different countries were responding to COVID, and are in the process of getting that published. I think this quote on the bottom is like one of the things that makes me most happy. We can change how the genes are transcribed into proteins, which change how the genes work, which means we can change the function of the cells and make survivors out of non-survivors. Hassan Alam is a trauma surgeon here, but we do some collaborative work. He actually said that in one of the meetings that we were in, and I'm like, this is why I come to work, because we make survivors out of non-survivors. You know, I think some important lessons is listen to the people around you, work hard. People are like, what are you doing today? And this line is from Paul Mazurik, who's one of my survival flight people. And he says, I'm saving lives through administration. And I think it's important to remember that, you know, we are part of the team that makes a difference. One of our mottos is, we're the best part of your worst day. And you know, going back to that team theory, there they go, I must follow, for I am their leader. And just kind of closing, I would say I've talked with Dr. Newmar, you know, about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and how do we, you know, how do we, you know, kind of value the work that we're doing. And I just think it's really powerful when your partner says, I think when we look back on the way that we spent our time, that the time that we spent, it was worth it and we made a difference. And that's what we're trying to do here is to spend our time in a manner that is worthwhile and makes a difference in the world. And so look forward to the question and answers. And I think, Dale, you are now up. So I will stop sharing my screen.
Steve, this is Travis. Quick question for you. What would you say a significant portion of your budget is state appropriated dollars that come from the state of Michigan?
No, we get no support from the state of Michigan as the University of Michigan.
Okay. It's just an interesting, a little aside, was you talking about department mission and feeling a need to train the private practice doctors for the state of Michigan. So to me, that sounded a little bit like fulfilling that budgetary constituency. It's not.
Yeah, and I would agree with that a little bit in that, our Board of Regents are elected by the citizens of the state of Michigan, and we are the provider of last resort for those citizens. So I think the mission very much resonates with us, but as, with many states right now, I think they were easy budgets to cut. And I think particularly because, our endowment as a university is so large, we're a big target for that.
It's just an interesting point for everyone to think about because, the private academic medical centers of the world might not have as much of a consideration for that being a part of their mission, but it's a very important one, of course.
Okay, thank you, Steve, and thank you, Kirsten. My name is Dale Borgeson, and I'm the Department Administrator for Emergency Medicine at Banner University Medical Center in Tucson. Our model is quite a bit different than Steve's or than UC San Francisco, where I worked for 24 years before retiring and coming here. So we are not really an integrated model of an academic medical center. We are a corporate model that exists in two parts. So the clinical part under Banner Health Systems and the academic part under the College of Medicine of the University of Arizona. So I report both to, I'm on the Banner side because all of the clinical administrators had to be employed on the Banner side. We were acquired 5 years ago. So my chair, Sam Keim, and I are now in the 5th year of our experience with the corporate model. So I report both to Sam Keim, my chair, who reports to the Dean of the College of Medicine, but I also report to the COO of Banner University Medical Center. And fortunately, Banner, although when they first acquired us, they had no experience with academic medical centers and did not have leaders who were familiar. But fortunately, over the past 5 years, they've actually managed to recruit some local leaders who are very experienced in administrative leadership to academic medical centers coming from UC San Diego or Emory or Missouri or that sort of thing. So even though there's we have separate budgets, so the Banner budget is a calendar year budget and the College of Medicine budget is July through June. So, and then of course I'm on top of both sides. So we're always doing the budget either for our academic side with College of Medicine or our clinical side. So anyway, that's just some of the differences, and we're a corporate model. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so a little bit of history here. The University of Arizona Medical Center existed as a traditional AMC for about 40 years with multiple missions, complex priority setting, successful in some areas, but essentially a mid-major in all the missions. And according to my chair, Sam Keim, we had more silos than Nebraska and more militias than Libya. the militias being, you know, disgruntled faculty marching on hospital administration, demanding better pay and that sort of thing. So it began failing financially due to decreasing clinical market share, decreasing state funding, and decreasing NIH research funding. In 2010, there was a merger of the medical center and the physician faculty group to form the University of Arizona Health Network, UAHN. The goal was alignment and reprioritization of patient care. That was attempted, but largely failed. There were intense battles between medical school leadership and the medical center. The financial problems worsened, and the research productivity worsened. So in 2014, the CEO, Mike Waldron of UAHN, opened discussions with Peter Fine, the Banner CEO. Banner is the largest nonprofit healthcare system in the Southwest. Next slide, please. So the acquisition, so March 1st, 2015, Banner Health Systems acquired the University of Arizona Health Network in a 30-year deal with the Board of Regents of the University of Arizona. Banner is a nonprofit healthcare operating system with 30 hospitals in 7 states, mainly Phoenix and Arizona statewide, annual revenue of a little bit over $10 billion, operating margin of 4%, and AA- S&P investment rating for 14 consecutive years. The acquisition was a $1.5 billion deal committing Banner to major improvements in healthcare infrastructure. And by 2019, they had constructed a state-of-the-art 500-bed hospital and 2 ambulatory care centers in Tucson for nearly $1 billion in new infrastructure investment. Next slide, please. So as I said, this was a 30-year deal between Banner and the University of Arizona, governed by the Academic Affiliation Agreement. So again, we're not really an integrated center. We are governed by the Academic Affiliation Agreement between the 2 sides, but there are very definitely the clinical side and the academic side in different organizations. So Banner also pledged significant annual academic support to the University of Arizona. They give about $30 million a year in academic support. The governing body of this agreement is the Academic Management Council, and it's composed of three members each from Banner and from the University of Arizona. And the 2 deans of the College of Medicine, our dean from Tucson and our dean from Phoenix, along with the university attorney, are on the governing board, the AMC. The AMC must approve all physician hiring, contracts, and compensation plans. Next slide, please. So some of the characteristics: all clinical care, excuse me, all clinical care is under Banner direction. All clinical salaries are paid by Banner. All physicians hired after the acquisition are Banner employed. Incumbent physicians can remain UA employed only if they have major academic and research effort and minimal clinical effort. Now, previously, before the acquisition, Banner's primary relation with physicians was with contract groups or private practice community docs. So, for example, our department in Tucson is the only employed emergency medicine physician group within the Banner system. All the other EDs have contract groups like Envision and Team Health. Next slide, please. So the acquisition was obviously a sharp break in disruptive change from the past. The legacy organization operated with a separate practice plan and hospital leadership. At the time of acquisition, UHN was heavily in debt, old infrastructure, lacking operational cohesion expertise, very strong tension between the dean and the chairs on the one hand and hospital leadership. And the hospital was frustrated that no progress was being made in terms of clinical quality, efficiency, productivity, and finances. Next slide, please. While department chairs were frustrated with inconsistent policies on funds flow, GME slots, salaries, et cetera. UHN overall was losing increasing millions every year went to junk bond status and cash on hand of only 45 days. So the financial woes were aggravated by UAHN purchase for $150 million of the EPIC EMR in 2012. Physician faculty were not really accountable to the healthcare delivery system for their productivity, and physician salaries were low to modest, ranging from the 25th to the 40th percentile double AMC with essentially no incentives. Next slide, please. So these are some of the disruptive changes. So EPIC was replaced by Banner's Cerner EMR and next-gen billing system, but the conversion was badly executed and resulted in huge operational and financial setbacks for over a year. Banner really underestimated the complexity of an academic medical center. They had installed Cerner in, there are 28 other hospitals, many of which are smaller community hospitals, and were really overconfident that this was going to be easy, and they discovered that that an academic medical center is a lot more complicated than a community hospital, and as a result, the conversion really failed, and it took us about a year to recover. So also with the acquisition, there was significant turnover in clinical faculty, given the new culture and the expectations regarding productivity. The old academic culture was replaced with a corporate culture focusing on productivity and financial viability. But fortunately, emergency medicine faculty remained largely intact, as we had always been productive and fiscally sound. And thanks to strong leadership, we were able to adapt and roll with the punches and adjust to the new corporate environment. Next slide, please. So these are pros and cons of the Banner corporate AMC model from the perspective of my chair, Sam Keim, and myself. So pros are that Banner installed a single CEO MD over the hospital and physician practices, bringing the architecture together. The College of Medicine Dean is on the Academic Management Council, a governing body, but otherwise advisory on clinical operations and not an authority. The clinical department chairs report to the dean, but they're also advisory in terms of clinical operations and not an authority, although our medical directors are an authority and they report to the Banner CMOs. Academic funds flow from Banner goes to the university, and departments have to negotiate with the dean and the senior vice president for annual academic support. The healthcare system is now has much more authority over physician productivity, both the carrot and the stick, a good incentive plan, but also salary cuts if you don't make your target. And so that kind of that kind of accountability for productivity has improved substantially. Clinical salaries have risen to between the 40th and 50th percentile double AMC, with the opportunity to earn strong incentives with high productivity, which our faculty are able to do. So at the time of the acquisition, Banner knew very little about academic medicine, and UAHN knew very little about healthcare operations. But our chair, Sam Keim, set the mantra, we must engage and educate each other. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are some of the cons. So academic work is not prioritized by the health system. Any work not mandated by ACGME or LCME is typically underfunded or not funded. After about a year after the acquisition, Banner moved the employment of all of our 80 residents and 10 fellows over to Banner employed. So although their education is of course directed by the University of Arizona, they're actually employees of Banner. And they did that because they saved a lot of money on benefits by doing that. Okay, our faculty have started to say no to academic activities such as teaching and administrative leadership if it's underfunded or not funded. And departments are having to cut back on non-clinical staff such as research support and general administrative activities that are not funded. there's very little to no academic startup resources to allow faculty to build reputations and become independent researchers, which you would expect from a mature academic medical center like Michigan and like my experience at UCSF and Stanford before I came here. And finally, from my perspective as the business manager, the Banner system has demonstrated surprisingly little competence in professional coding and billing, largely due to their past practice as a hospital operating system whose relations with physicians were largely contractor. Our community and those docs did their own billing. Upon acquisition, we were saddled with an antiquated billing system, next-gen, and inexperienced professional revenue cycle staff and leadership. Our physician charge master fees were also discounted 25 to 40% to 2.5 times RBRVS, making the ratio between facility and professional charges 8 to 1. Fortunately, we were able to outsource our coding to an EM specialty group after a tussle of a couple years with Banner corporate revenue cycle leadership. And the outsourcing to a specialty group has really been instrumental in allowing us to accurately abstract and code our documentation, and to generate good RVU capture and to be successful with our RVU-based incentive plan. Next slide, please. So in summary, we've been struggling for the past 5 years to assert and push for resources to fund the academic mission within the corporate model. So the corporate environment has forced us to be on our A game in terms of finding creative financing and setting priorities for academic resource development. Our chair, Dr. CAEMA, is heavily engaged as a member of the Physician Comp Plan Committee and the Education Committee under the Academic Management Council governing body. In some of the gains, we have achieved Banner recognition of academic rank in the setting of RVU rate values. We've also achieved Banner recognition of academic promotion and clinical salary increases. Next slide, please. And most importantly, we've achieved, with the unanimous waiver consent of all of our faculty, a 20% carve out from our group incentive plan to fund non-clinical mission support within the department. And this is, because we're highly productive, this is, about $400,000 a year, which is really very, very key for for the funding of our academic mission. This goes to support teaching, research, and academic leadership roles within the department, which is very important because state funding has been consistently reduced to the College of Medicine over the, I've been here now about 10 years, and every year state funding is reduced. And our state budget now is really quite minimal. And the College of Medicine actually does not have a lot of resources either, because even though Banner, sends money over to the university annually, most of that money is not then channeled down to the College of Medicine and to the departments. So we've also made gains in achieving important support for our ACGME fellowship and UME clerkship programs, as well as for our medical directorships under Banner. And in addition, we have the potential to expand our clinical trials in our NIH networks, Siren, PEDAL, COVID, and PCARN, to tap data from the 1 million annual ED visits within the Banner system. Next slide, please. So in retrospect, as we look back on the past 5 years, we would have invested even more in data acquisition, analysis, reports for revenue cycle, physician productivity, GME metrics, research metrics. We would have listened even more to learn about the corporate mission, strategies, and people and what they're all about. And then after listening, we would make clear and persuasive proposals about why academic programs and initiatives will be of value to the corporation. And then we would bring back the data and graphics of analysis to show the progress made. We'd collaborate even more with our fellow administrators in different clinical departments on key issues, mainly the compensation plan. But we wouldn't wait for the lagging departments to figure out that they must work with the corporate structure, not fight with it. Last slide, please. So it's been a struggle over the past 5 years to creatively come up with resources to fund the academic mission within the corporate context, with emphasis on RVUs, productivity, finances, and that sort of thing. We actually have made some significant gains from where we started, but of course, the struggle continues. Thank you.
Thanks, Dale. That was great. Did you have anything to add, Travis, before we go on to my presentation?
No, I was just going to introduce you. Thank you.
Didn't mean to cut you off there. Sorry, y'all. This is Colbey Walker. I'm the Administrator of Emergency Medicine at UT Southwestern Medical Center. Let me get my screen share up here. Give me 1 second. And let me also say on the front end, my wife and I are both working from home, and we're in a relatively modest-sized home. So if you hear her chatting in the background, she is on a call right now. If she gets too loud, just send me a note, and I'll try to get her to hush up a little bit so you guys can hear me. But I've got the door closed, so we'll hope that works out. Like I said, my name is Colbey Walker. I'm the Administrator for Emergency Medicine at UT Southwestern Medical Center. I don't know that there's a real term for what UT Southwestern is as it relates to organizational structure and how it might compare to what you've heard from both Dale and Steve. I think probably a little closer to the University of Michigan setup, but I'll leave that for you to decide. The way I kind of described it is a state-based combined academic and clinical model, and we'll get into why I think that is. First, I'll start giving you a little bit, just a very little bit of context about the UT part of that UT Southwestern Medical Center, go into what UT Southwestern Medical Center is, how it's kind of set up from an organizational perspective, dip down briefly into what our department looks like and where it's aligned within the larger UT Southwestern enterprise, and then kind of step back out at the UT Southwestern level again and share some kind of updates about what's going on around UT Southwestern, what we deal with every day, how our organizational structure kind of relates to that, and then some of my thoughts, similar to what the other gentleman provided, some pros and cons of the structure and the setup as it currently is. So first, the University of Texas system. It's pretty old, 144 years old, founded in 1876, starting with the University of Texas at Austin. There are 14 member institutions of the University of Texas system. 6 of those are health-related institutions in some way, including medical schools, health professional schools, nursing schools, those sorts of things, public schools of public health. And then 8 of them are what you would consider traditional universities, including UT Austin, UT Dallas, UT Arlington, so on and so forth. UT Southwestern clearly is one of those 14 member institutions. The other 13 are listed there. We are a state-based organization, and what sounds to be a little bit different from the University of Michigan model, the University of Texas system and each of those 14 member institutions do receive state funding every year. Collectively across all 14, approximately $2.3 billion from the state funnels into the UT system, and that's about 12% of the system's total budgets. Part of what comes along with that, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, is being a state organization that receives state funding. There are a lot of state policies, rules, guidelines, processes and things that apply to every member institution, every UT system institution, every system of higher education that is state funded in the state of Texas as a result of that. So the University of Texas system, again, this is just the highest level. The mission is to improve the human condition in Texas, our nation, and the world. There are 83,000 employees, 21,000 faculty, 240,000 students across all 14 institutions, and is the largest of 6 state university systems in Texas. This is, as I'm sure you'll be able to tell, not an official org chart. This is something that I created in lieu of trying to being able to find an actual org chart that just shows the 14 member institutions. Obviously, each one of these individual institutions, including UT Southwestern Medical Center, has its own very complex, very large, intricate org chart, which we'll get into here in a second. So going to UT Southwestern Medical Center, 76 years old. So not super old as far as, academic medical institutions go. I came from a place on the East Coast that was about twice as old, but established in its own right, especially here in the state of Texas. It was started as Southwestern Medical College in 1943. That was caused when Baylor moved from Dallas to Houston. There was no medical institution of the sort in Dallas anymore, so a group of local wealthy folks got together and said, let's create it. So they did, and it became the 68th medical school in the United States. It wasn't until 1949 that Southwestern Medical College joined the University of Texas system. There was an opportunity for sharing of resources that had already happened in kind of an informal way, and they just took it to the next step and said, let's just go ahead and make this one big happy family. And that's what they did. Changed names a couple of times, changed scope and kind of direction and what it was intended to do. Largely from the outset, it was a research institution. Then it expanded into a research and educational institution. Didn't really get heavy on the clinical care component until much later, which I'll mention here in a bit. But in 1987 is when the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center became the name, and that's obviously what we're still called today. Again, being part of a state university system, we receive state funding at UT Southwestern, about $200 million a year. And that's about 7% of the total annual budget at UT Southwestern. So you can see across all of the institutions, it was about 12% of the total budget. UT Southwestern, it's a little bit less, 7%, which you would expect with all the clinical revenue and things involved. And UT Southwestern's mission is to promote health and a healthy society that enables achievement of full human potential through education, discovery, and healing. 19,000 employees, about 3,200 faculty, including part-time and volunteer faculty, 1,700 students in the medical school and the graduate school and the School of Health Professions, and about 2,000 trainees, including all residents and fellows and the like. It's a very large, complex organization. The things that UT Southwestern does, similar to what you've heard from the other folks, research, education, and patient care. Began as a research institution, had lots of research success, and really that's one of the things UT Southwestern is most known for regionally, nationally, and internationally. 6 Nobel laureates since 1985, 25 National Academy of Science members, 16 National Academy of Medicine members, and about $500 million in research expenditures annually. It really has been the calling card for UT Southwestern for a long time, and I think only recently has, if you imagine that 3-piece pie of research, education, and patient care, only recently have those other 2 slices really started to kind of hold their own and maybe even out that pie a little bit. Education. There, like I mentioned, a medical school, a graduate school, and a School of Health Professions here. The School of Health Professions trains folks, physical therapists, physician's assistants, folks in other allied health roles. Graduate school is comprised of, life sciences and similar departments and programs, biochemistry, biology, molecular biology, those sorts of things. And then the medical school, I'm sure most of you are pretty familiar with how that's set up and what those generally look like. There are also more than 100 ACGME accredited residency and fellowship programs across campus, and an additional 65 that are not eligible for ACGME accreditation, but are approved by the Texas Medical Board. Between all of that, again, you have about 2,000 trainees across campus, and many of the departments across campus, especially the clinical departments, have the one of or the largest training program for their specific specialty or subspecialty in the country as it relates to ACGME accreditation. Patient care, across a general year, about 100,000 inpatients, about 375,000 emergency visits, about 3 million outpatients, and that covers care across about 80 specialties in DFW. All of that care is not located specifically on UT Southwestern's campus or at UT Southwestern facilities. Actually, the vast majority of it does not occur at UT Southwestern facilities. The longest and most established, patient care relationship that UT Southwestern faculty and UT Southwestern providers has is with Parkland Hospital and Health System. And Parkland is the large public safety net hospital, county funded safety net hospital that's located directly across the street. It's very big, as Travis mentioned earlier, about 1,000 beds. the largest emergency department in the country. If you include both our urgent care center and our main ED, about 190 treatment spaces. We see between the two about 240, 260,000 patients a year, or 240, 260,000 encounters a year. And being the public safety net hospital, the range of things that are seen is, varies greatly. It's a lot of folks that come in for, their primary care work because they have no other place to go, as well as seeing some of the, most extreme and severe trauma cases that, whether it's a car accident or some violence-induced trauma in the greater Dallas area. So it's really kind of spans the gamut, and it's a really busy, interesting place to work. Another location that we have a longstanding clinical relationship with as an organization is Children's Medical Center, and it's a 500-bed pediatric hospital that's just to the south of UT Southwestern's campus. I think by volume is the 5th or 6th busiest pediatric hospital in the country, and all of the physician providers at both Parkland and at Children's are UT Southwestern faculty. So it is, there is a true symbiotic relationship between both Parkland and Children's and UT Southwestern as to making sure that those clinical services are provided there. Across UT Southwestern, there's also a significant presence that we have at the Dallas VA Hospital and at Texas Scottish Rite Hospital, a relatively small orthopedic hospital located just kind of down the road, maybe a mile or so away. UT Southwestern, though, does, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, have hospitals now on campus through a couple of different mechanisms. There are 2 sites for what is now considered one hospital, Clements University Hospital, located on the UT Southwestern campus. It is currently about a 390-bed hospital that is undergoing expansion that will open this fall to make it about a 640-bed hospital that is between this campus that we've created, this kind of medical district that exists. Parkland definitely has the vast majority of specialties practice there, but is largely the public safety net hospital. Children's obviously is the pediatric hospital, and then by default, or maybe by intention, depending on how you look at it, Clements University Hospital, owned and operated by UT Southwestern on the UT Southwestern campus, has become kind of the quaternary level care, transplant, neurological services, cardiac services, cancer care, those sorts of services are what you find primarily at the UT Southwestern hospitals. So this is a really complex, really ugly, but the official org chart of UT Southwestern Medical Center. And what I think is important to notice here is just how many titles and names and leaders there are of different subsets of this organization. I've kind of distilled this down into something a little more, I think, a little more palatable, but I really wanted you to see this and then to see where all of the clinical departments fall on this org chart. That's this little red box over to the left. So all of the clinical departments roll up into that one little box, if that gives you a sense of the kind of complexity of what we're talking about here. This is the same thing, but done in a way that I think makes it a little cleaner and maybe a little easier to understand. So we have one single president of UT Southwestern Medical Center, and UT Southwestern Medical Center includes the academic institutions, which, like I mentioned, are the medical school, school health professions, and so on and so forth. That comprises the hospital and health system, that comprises all of the centralized kind of functions of UT Southwestern Medical Center that are broken down into 2 kind of subsets: institutional advancement, government affairs, development, marketing, communications, and business affairs, all the kind of traditional business services, centralized business services you would expect: finance, human resources, information resources, so on and so forth. The 2 on the left, academic institutions and hospital and health system, is really that's the stuff we're talking about, and I think that's kind of the meat of this. I added underneath the medical school box over here on the far left, the Department of Emergency Medicine, but of course that's where every clinical department and every academic department would be located in this org chart. I didn't want to list them all because it would look ugly like the last one did. But I really kind of wanted to show how things funnel up. So the president of UT Southwestern Medical Center has oversight of all of these different components of our academic and clinical enterprise. And each subset of it is headed up by an executive vice president, who then has underneath her or him a series of different leadership teams for whatever may be going on. So for example, if you're looking at the UT Southwestern Hospitals and Health System, that is headed up by an EVP, it's Dr. John Warner. He, in that role, has a CEO, COO, and CFO of the UT Southwestern Clements University Hospital, which would be in that UT Southwestern Hospitals and Clinics section. He also has a vice president for UT Southwestern Ambulatory Services, which would be kind of rolling up through him. So, you know, again, this is not the complete picture. That's what this ugly thing is for. But I just kind of wanted to show, at least somewhat simply, how some of the major functions of the institution roll up. And again, that's where we're located out here off to the left. So the Department of Emergency Medicine, I'll dip down into just briefly. So we're a young department. We're only 5 years old. We previously were a division of the Department of Surgery, and in 2015 spun off and became a separate standalone department, at which point a department chair and myself, a department administrator, were hired to you know, help make this thing a real department. And that's what we've been trying to do over the past 5 years. Within the Department of Emergency Medicine now, we have a number of subspecialties represented: disaster and global health, medical toxicology, emergency medical services, ultrasound, simulation, forensic medicine, tactical medicine, and we're growing all the time. We're in the process now of establishing a sports medicine it'll actually be a section of a division that exists within the department. We're working on, we have a couple of faculty who are working in critical care environments as intensivists for about half of their effort. We're trying to leverage that into having a subspecialty there. And again, as an organization or as a department, we receive some state funds. It's really not a lot for us as a department, about 1% of our annual budget, about $600,000. We also do receive a grant for about $400,000 a year to support our residency program, but that's a competitive grant process. Currently have about 100 faculty, 17 APPs, and about 40 staff, and we train about 100 trainees a year. So stepping back out a little bit, oh, actually, no, let me show you this first. So this is not really an org chart, but this is kind of how we think about the leadership structure or the organization of our department. Obviously, it looks a bit different than what you've seen in the last couple of slides when, you know, we're talking about an organizational chart. We really think of ourselves, and we really practice as a matrix style organization. Our approach is not as much hierarchical as some places I've worked in the past, and we tried to represent that with kind of how we line things up. So each of the vertical blue bars are divisions within the department. Each of the horizontal orange bars are functions that we have as a department. So we have a vice chair of education, a vice chair of research, and 2 medical directors who help oversee each of our functions, and their responsibilities span the faculty within all of the divisions of the department. Likewise, those division chiefs for disaster and global health, EMS, toxicology, whatever else, their faculty are engaged in clinical activities, research activities, and educational activities. And so again, we wanted to kind of set this up in a way and to visualize it so that it was more in line with what we actually experience, as opposed to, you know, the traditional org chart that you may see out there that, you know, exists for UT Southwestern as a whole. So stepping back out, UT Southwestern is kind of where we are today. So we're growing quickly. We have been for a couple of decades. It was really kind of late to the game that UT got into the clinical care business, and you know, the faculty who were teaching and doing research for all those many years prior to UT Southwestern actually owning any clinical facilities, they were seeing patients, but it was always at Parkland, at Children's, or in some other practice outside of the organization. In the early 2000s, UT Southwestern started purchasing facilities located on or adjacent to UT Southwestern's campus at the time, and started investing a lot of money in building those facilities on campus. At the same time, we've seen a huge reinvestment in education space and research space across campus. New buildings are coming up all the time. there's been a lot of affiliation going on. And I mentioned earlier that there's longstanding relationships with Parkland and Children's, and that each of those organizations are, even if not formally affiliated on paper, are integrated so much into one another. We are integrated so much with them that at this point, it would be hard for any of the three of us to survive without the others. So there is a deep relationship there that is certainly impacted by how our organization is structured and works, and how each of those organizations are structured and works. But in addition to that, recently, 2016, UT Southwestern into a formal affiliation with Texas Health Resources, which is a local Dallas-Fort Worth area health system comprised of 24 hospitals and a ton of community locations for primary care and specialty care. They were lacking the level, the tertiary, quaternary level care facility at their fingertips. They were lacking the academic partner. They were lacking the cutting edge updates to new techniques or new procedures or whatever else. We obviously, as an organization, have not been very established in the clinical component of our work and don't have the expertise or the recognition in the community like Texas Health Resources would. So the organizations came together in an official affiliation to leverage each other's strengths and move forward together. We did not combine the organizations. There's no true there were no mergers, there were no acquisitions or anything like that because we're a state organization. It's what's called an affiliation that's allowed by laws in the state of Texas. And I think there's been, a lot of success that we felt. So DFW is the fourth largest metropolitan area in the United States, and we really don't have a lot of regional competition with most things that we do from a education standpoint, from a research standpoint, or from a clinical standpoint. For being such a large metropolitan area and us to be the only very large, established, reputable academic medical center is kind of unique. So we've been very healthy from a financial standpoint, which has of course helped us during these stressful times over the last few months, and I think positions us well going forward. Some of my thoughts as to how this works, and this goes back to the pros and cons you heard some of the other presenters mention, and I think you'll find very similar in a lot of ways. The first thing, which maybe is a little different, is the strings attached to state funding. So we do get money from the state. It's nice. It's mostly consistent. There's arguments over that every couple of years when legislature is in session, but it's pretty consistent. The problem is that one could argue anyway is that there are strings attached and that there are expectations that come with it. And being a state organization requires us to follow certain processes or rules or guidelines, or not be able to do certain things that we would otherwise. So, it's good and bad. It depends on the day whether you like it or dislike it, but it's something we have to deal with. Being part of the UT system is kind of a similar thing. I think probably less of an impact on a day-to-day basis. There really, for better or worse, isn't a whole lot of movement within the system between those 14 member institutions to standardize things, to collaborate. I mean, those collaborations do happen kind of organically, but they're not facilitated or created with any real intentionality with how our organizations are set up or how we operate them. There are some rules and things that affect us, but largely we're kind of on our own. I do think the fact that we have, kind of a single leader over both the academic component and the clinical component is very helpful in many instances. It allows for a single point of decision to be present, so that in those instances where there may be differing opinions, or the success of one may hurt the other, or vice versa, that there is one person who can theoretically take it both into account and act on behalf of the collective organization and help make that decision. I think it's largely come out that way. It's been a good thing, I think. And this is a very complex place, and a lot of the things that Steve and Dale both mentioned, we experience at UT Southwestern. Variety of revenue streams, some challenges that come along with the traditional department-based structure not aligning with a patient's experience as they're navigating a specific disease. They don't care if they're seeing the Department of Surgery or the Department of Radiation Oncology. They just want to get their cancer taken care of. And the traditional department structure sometimes is an obstacle to that. A lot of people wearing a lot of different hats, all the matrix reporting relationships. I mean, our department's a great example. That's cool because that's how it really works, but it's pretty complicated sometimes when you can't just have one person say, this is the way it's going to be, and this is how it's going to go. Generally leads to better decision making in my experience, but usually takes longer to get there and requires that consensus to be built. It's a confusing place to get things done, and I think where the rubber meets the road in those relationships with Parkland and those relationships with Children's and all the other organizations with whom we work, I think there's they're maybe similarly or equally complex on their side of the fence, and when both of those things hit one another in a conference room trying to figure out how to figure out what the emergency department support is going to be for this year, it leads to lots of head scratching, lots of confusion, lots of definition setting, and we usually get to somewhere that everybody agrees, but it's certainly a process that's involved with it. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.